My screen went black in the middle of my presentation. Not frozen. Not glitching. Not a technical error. Revoked. 20 pairs of eyes turned from the dashboard projection to me. I watched my name disappear from the top right corner of my computer screen. The system had logged me out. Someone had done this deliberately, right in the middle of my quarterly review presentation. Then my phone started buzzing on the conference table. Slack notifications lit up the screen one after another. Each one a small explosion of my professional life. You've been removed from #ops leadership. You no longer have admin access. Team ownership updated. Calendar permissions revoked. My hands went cold. The kind of cold that starts in your fingertips and spreads up your arms until your whole body feels frozen. My manager, Trent Caldwell, leaned back in his chair at the head of the conference table. He folded his hands together across his chest like this was completely normal, like he'd been expecting this exact moment. "We'll take it from here, May," he said calmly. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "Take what from here?" I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up completely. I couldn't form words. Couldn't breathe properly. The projector still displayed my last slide on the wall behind me. Q4 Retention Strategy, presented by May Parker. I didn't speak. I physically couldn't. My brain couldn't process what was happening fast enough to form a response. The room felt like it was tilting sideways. My ears rang with a high-pitched sound that blocked out everything else. The fluorescent light seemed too bright suddenly. Too harsh. Trent stood up slowly, deliberately. He buttoned his suit jacket like he was about to make an important announcement at a press conference. Every movement was calculated and precise. "The leadership transition starts today," he said, addressing the entire room instead of me. His eyes swept over my team members. "Blake Harrison will oversee the operations team moving forward. He'll be your primary point of contact for all projects and strategic decisions." Blake. The guy Trent had hired just 3 months ago. The same person who had asked me last week how to run basic payroll approvals. The one who still couldn't navigate our project management system without help. He was taking over my entire team. My team looked confused and uncomfortable. I could see it clearly on their faces. Anna's eyebrows pulled together in concern. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat and glanced at me. Nobody had been warned about this massive change. They were finding out the same way I was, blindsided in front of everyone. My hands felt completely numb now. By noon, my email access had been downgraded to individual contributor level. All my administrative permissions were gone. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, my entire calendar had been wiped completely clean. Every meeting I'd scheduled over the next 3 months, every one-on-one session with my team members, every planning discussion, every client review, all gone. Deleted. Erased like they'd never existed. By 3 o'clock, my team was sitting in a large conference room without me. I could see them through the glass walls as I walked past. Blake stood at the front of the room where I usually stood during our team meetings. Trent sat beside him in my usual chair, nodding and gesturing like he was explaining something crucial and important. Nobody had told me there would be a meeting. I wasn't invited to my own team's discussion about their future. That was the day my manager cut my access and reassigned my team to someone else. But I didn't yell or make a scene. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I didn't storm into Trent's office demanding explanations or threatening legal action. Instead, I did one calculated thing. I sent a single carefully worded email to the right people. Then I closed my laptop, gathered my belongings and went home. Then I waited. And I watched everything unfold. My name is May Parker. 4 years earlier, the operations department at our healthcare tech company was a complete disaster. The company was bleeding money from massively inefficient processes. Staff turnover was at 48%. Nearly half the team quit every single year. New hires would leave within 3 months of starting. Nobody wanted to work in operations. The environment was toxic. The previous manager had left suddenly after a nervous breakdown, and the department was spiraling into complete chaos. I was brought in specifically to fix everything, and I did exactly that. I personally hired every single analyst on the current team. I created every operational process from absolute scratch. I built comprehensive training programs that actually worked. I standardized workflows that had been random and inconsistent for years. I implemented new software systems that cut processing time in half. Within 2 years of relentless work, I'd stabilized turnover to just 9%. We became the most efficient department in the entire company. Other departments started copying our methods. Trent Caldwell wasn't even my manager back then. He worked in a completely different division handling client relations. He didn't know anything about what I'd built, or how many hours I'd worked to build it from nothing. But when the company restructured last year, Trent got promoted. Suddenly, he was my direct boss. He inherited everything I'd created. The sidelining didn't start loudly or obviously. It started small and subtle. First, I noticed I wasn't being invited to certain meetings anymore. Strategy sessions I'd always attended for 3 years suddenly happened without me. When I asked Trent about it casually, he said they were just preliminary brainstorming discussions, and he'd catch me up later when things were more concrete. He never did catch me up. Then there were mysterious quick executive check-ins that somehow always excluded me. Trent would have closed-door meetings with the CFO or the VP of strategy, and I'd hear about important decisions secondhand from my own team members who'd seen calendar invites. Blake started getting copied on random emails that had absolutely nothing to do with him. Operational updates I'd been sending for years. Client feedback forms. Budget reports. Things that were clearly my direct responsibility, not his. He didn't even understand half the content, but his name kept appearing in the CC line. I asked Trent about it once, casually in the hallway near the coffee station. Is there something going on I should know about? Seems like Blake is getting involved in operations. He smiled warmly and put his hand on my shoulder. You're overthinking things, May. Blake's just getting up to speed on how the department works. It's good for him to understand our processes. But I wasn't overthinking anything. I was paying very close attention. 2 weeks before my access got cut, Trent told the vice president that I was struggling to scale with organizational growth. Struggling. That was the word he used. Struggling. My team had just hit 112% of our quarterly target 3 weeks early. We'd exceeded every single metric. Client satisfaction scores were at an all-time high of 93%. Processing efficiency had improved by 18% over the previous quarter. We were the top-performing department in the entire company. But Trent had started presenting my data in executive meetings without ever mentioning my name. He'd take my detailed reports, remove all my attributions, and present them as generic department achievements. Which technically they were department achievements. But he made absolutely sure nobody knew I'd personally created them or led the team that executed them. I sat in one of those meetings 2 months ago. I watched him present my quarterly dashboard, the one I'd spent 3 weeks building, and call it our operational overview. He clicked through my slides. He discussed my analysis. He answered questions using my research. And he never once said, May built this or May's team accomplished this, or even May identified this trend. That's when I realized something crucial. He wasn't building Blake up to help me manage a growing team. He was building Blake up to completely replace me. After the presentation disaster, Trent called me into a glass-walled conference room on the 3rd floor. Everyone in the office could see us clearly through the transparent walls. That was completely intentional. He wanted people to witness this conversation without being able to hear the actual words. He wanted them to see me being managed and corrected. This isn't personal, May, he said as soon as I sat down in the cold chair. That's always how you know something is absolutely personal. When someone starts a conversation by insisting it isn't personal. We need stronger executive-facing leadership for the next phase of growth, he continued smoothly. The role is evolving beyond pure operational management. We need someone with a more strategic presence. I built all the executive dashboards we currently use, I replied quietly, keeping my voice steady. I present to the board of directors every quarter. I created our strategic planning framework. He didn't even blink or acknowledge what I'd said. You'll support Blake during the transition period. Train him thoroughly on your processes. Make sure everything transfers smoothly to his oversight. Transition period. He actually used those words. He wanted me to train my own replacement. To hand over everything I'd built from nothing. To smile and cooperate while he systematically erased 4 years of my life's work. How long is this transition expected to last? I asked. He shrugged casually. We'll evaluate as we go along. Translation: until you get frustrated and quit on your own. I went back to my desk in the open floor plan. My actual desk, not the private office I used to have before they repurposed it for collaborative space last month. My stomach hurts. Not from anger yet, that would come later. This was pure betrayal. Physical betrayal that made me feel sick. I worked weekends for this company. I'd stayed until midnight fixing system crashes. I'd missed my nephew's birthday party last year to handle an emergency client situation. I'd given absolutely everything to this department. And Trent was throwing me away like I meant nothing. Like I was easily replaceable. I had a mortgage on my small condo. Student loans that wouldn't pause themselves just because I was upset. Health insurance tied to this job that covered my medications. My mother's medical bills that I helped pay every month. I couldn't just quit dramatically and walk out. I couldn't afford to make a scene and get fired for insubordination. Trent knew all of these personal details. He'd approved my salary increase last year specifically because I'd mentioned during my review that I needed to help support my family. He knew I was financially trapped and couldn't easily leave. He thought that meant I'd fold quietly. That I'd accept this public humiliation and fade away without causing problems. Instead, I opened my archive folder on my personal cloud storage account. I'd been methodically saving everything for years. Every email, every document, every approval. I save everything. It's a habit I developed early in my career after watching a colleague get blamed for a decision her manager had made. Approval chains showing exactly who authorized which decisions. Performance reviews documenting my specific achievements with numbers. Hiring authorizations with executive signatures. Revenue reports proving team performance quarter by quarter. Email threads showing strategic discussions. Slack conversations with accurate timestamps. Everything. I had copies of everything, including extensive documentation showing that Trent had personally approved every single strategic decision he was now using as evidence of my leadership gaps. He'd signed off on the budget restructuring last spring. He'd approved the new hiring plan in writing. He'd enthusiastically endorsed the client management approach in an email to the CEO. Every decision he was now using as proof that I couldn't scale was a decision he'd explicitly supported in writing with his digital signature. He'd just conveniently forgotten that paper trails exist forever in the digital age. That emails don't disappear. Those documents get saved and backed up. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious yet. I felt calculated and cold. I opened a new document in my personal email and started drafting very carefully. Every single word mattered. Every sentence needed to be absolutely perfect. This email would either save my career or end it completely. There was no middle ground anymore. I worked on it for 3 hours, reading and rereading every line. Subject line: clarification on leadership transition and performance data. I kept my tone completely neutral and professional. No emotion. No accusations. No anger. Just facts presented clearly and methodically. I wrote, I want to ensure leadership has accurate and complete information regarding the operations transition announced today. I've attached relevant documentation for your thorough review and consideration. Then I attached everything I'd collected. Quarterly performance metrics showing our team consistently exceeding targets. Executive approval emails with Trent's digital signature on every strategic decision. Budget sign-offs proving he'd personally authorized spending he later criticized. Slack timestamps contradicting his claims about communication gaps, and my alleged resistance to feedback. I included the glowing email where he praised my exceptional leadership abilities just 6 months ago, and the message where he told the executive team I was absolutely critical to operational success and company growth. I added the detailed documentation showing I flagged potential process issues that he'd completely ignored. Problems that later became his primary justification for my removal. I CC'd Human Resources, the VP of Operations, and the Chief Financial Officer. Then I hovered my mouse over the send button. My hand shook slightly. This would change everything. There was absolutely no going back after this. I took a deep breath, and I hit send. Then I shut my laptop, put it in my bag and went home. No immediate reply came that evening. No furious phone call. No emergency meeting notification. Just complete silence. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept checking my email obsessively every 20 minutes. Nothing. By 3 in the morning, I'd convinced myself I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe I should have kept quiet. Maybe I should have just started looking for another job quietly. But when I arrived at the office the next morning, something had fundamentally changed in the atmosphere. Trent walked past my desk twice that morning. Both times he looked straight ahead at nothing. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't make eye contact, didn't say good morning like he normally did. His jaw was clenched tight enough that I could see the muscle jumping. He'd read the email. He'd opened every attachment. And he knew exactly what it all meant. Around 11 o'clock, Blake stopped by my desk awkwardly. He looked uncomfortable and wouldn't meet my eyes. Hey, do you have the login credentials for the main client database? Nobody can find them anywhere. I documented all of that in the detailed transition notes I'd been forced to write, but apparently nobody had actually bothered to read them. It's in the shared folder, I said calmly, my voice steady. Under administrative access protocols. He nodded quickly and hurried away. His confidence from yesterday's meeting had completely vanished. The first cracks were starting to show. That afternoon, my calendar pinged with a new meeting invitation. Data reconciliation discussion, scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. The attendees list included the CFO, the VP of Operations, and me. Trent's name wasn't anywhere on the invitation. 20 minutes later, another email arrived from Human Resources. They wanted to schedule a routine documentation review for later this week. They specifically asked me to bring any relevant performance materials and historical records. My team started messaging me privately on Slack. Anna wrote, "Why is the finance department asking about last quarter's projections? They want the original files from the server, not the summary reports Trent presented." Marcus sent, "Legal just requested all the hiring documentation. Something's happening. Because numbers don't lie. Numbers can be reframed and represented and repackaged. But the raw data always tells the truth eventually. And when executives start asking for original files instead of summaries, it means they're checking someone's story. They're looking for inconsistencies. They're building their own independent picture of what actually happened." Trent had spent weeks carefully crafting a narrative about my inadequacy, but narratives fall apart quickly when someone actually checks the receipts. And I had all the receipts neatly organized. Friday morning, Trent called me into his private office. Not a glass conference room this time where people could watch. His private office with the door closed. That was interesting and telling. He didn't want any witnesses for this particular conversation. "You blindsided leadership with that email," he said as soon as I sat down. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering underneath every word. "I clarified the documentation that was requested," I replied calmly, matching his tone. His expression hardened. "Nobody requested anything from you. You went over my head deliberately. You made me look bad to the executive team. I shared information and context. You undermined me." His voice rose slightly before he caught himself. "You created instability. You undermined a carefully planned transition. You made the executive team question my decisions." "No. I'd created visibility. There's a significant difference. The CFO is now asking detailed questions about budget decisions I made over a year ago," he continued, his frustration barely contained. "Questions I shouldn't have to answer or justify. This is directly your fault." I stayed quiet. Let him talk. Let him show his cards. "You need to send a follow-up email today," he said finally, leaning forward, "clarifying that you fully support the transition, that you were just providing background context, not raising concerns about my leadership." He wanted me to recant, to publicly undermine my own documentation. "I'll consider it," I said non-committally. I had absolutely no intention of considering it. The following week, HR scheduled a meeting with the internal audit team. They formally requested access to historical reporting going back 18 months. Not from me personally, from the server, from the original source files where timestamps and complete edit histories lived permanently. Trent hadn't altered any actual data. He was too smart for something that obvious and easily caught. But he had systematically reshaped the narrative around that data over time. He'd taken my specific accomplishments and carefully reframed them as general department achievements that happened to occur while I was there. He'd taken my strategic decisions and reframed them as his brilliant initiatives that I'd executed poorly. The thing about narratives is they depend entirely on people not checking the details. They work perfectly when everyone accepts the story at face value without questions. But narratives collapse completely and quickly under real scrutiny. When someone actually pulls the original files and compares them line by line to what was presented, the inconsistencies become glaringly obvious. Timestamps don't lie about who created what. Email chains don't forget who said what. Server logs don't rewrite history to make people look better. And the internal audit team had access to absolutely everything. Every file. Every edit. Every timestamp. Every communication. I imagine them pulling reports and comparing dates. Finding Trent's signature on approvals he now claimed weren't his responsibility. Blake started asking me procedural questions again, just like when he first started. At first it was small operational things. How to access certain monthly reports. Where specific documentation lived in our system. Who to contact for vendor payment issues. Then the questions got progressively bigger and more complex. How do you handle budget variance discussions with the finance department? What's the exact escalation path for client complaints? When do you loop in the legal team versus handling things internally? He was slowly realizing that managing a team was completely different from sitting in meetings and nodding. The job required institutional knowledge he didn't have, experience he hadn't built over years, professional relationships he hadn't developed. Trent had put him in charge without preparing him properly, without training him adequately, without setting him up for success. I watched Blake struggle through a difficult client call on Tuesday morning. He couldn't answer basic questions about our processes. He kept saying, "I'll get back to you on that," to things I could have answered immediately off the top of my head. After the call ended badly, he came to my desk. He looked exhausted and overwhelmed. "This is harder than I expected," he admitted quietly. I almost felt bad for him. He hadn't asked to be thrown into this impossible situation. He was just a pawn in Trent's game. Almost. But sympathy wouldn't change what was happening. The quarterly board review was scheduled for 2 weeks away. Every quarter, department heads presented detailed performance updates to the board of directors. It was a major event. Executives prepared for weeks. The presentations shaped budget decisions and strategic priorities for the next quarter. Trent had clearly planned to use this board meeting to present his organizational improvements. Improvements that began with removing me and installing Blake. He'd present it as modernizing leadership, bringing in a fresh perspective, preparing for future growth. But the CFO sent an email that changed everything. For the upcoming board review, we need original contributor context on operational achievements over the past 18 months. May Parker, please prepare supplementary documentation showing individual project ownership and specific outcomes. Original contributor context. That meant me. That meant my name needed to be explicitly attached to the work I'd actually done. Trent couldn't present my achievements as his own anymore. The CFO had specifically requested my documentation, my attribution, my voice in the presentation. I imagined Trent reading that email at his desk. I imagined his face as he realized the board wanted to hear directly from me, not through his filter. The narrative he'd so carefully built was crumbling faster than he could repair it. HR requested detailed written documentation of my complete role history for their records. I didn't editorialize or add opinions or emotions. I just listed pure facts with specific dates and measurable outcomes. January 2020. Hired as operations manager. Department turnover at 48%. Staff morale critically low. No standardized processes. March 2020. Implemented new comprehensive training program. Hired 6 analysts. Created standardized workflows for all operations. June 2020. Turnover reduced to 31%. Efficiency improved by 12%. I went through every single quarter methodically. Every initiative I'd led. Every measurable outcome. For complete years of building something substantial from absolutely nothing. I attached screenshots of executive praise. Emails where the VP had called my work exceptional and transformative. Messages where Trent himself had written, "Couldn't do this without you. And you're the backbone of this department." The same executives who were now questioning him had once praised me directly and specifically. The documentation proved it conclusively. Their own words in their own emails showed they knew exactly what I'd contributed. Trent had counted on people forgetting over time, on old emails getting buried in archives, on praise becoming a vague memory instead of documented fact. But I'd saved everything. And now it was all coming back in an organized file. Trent tried one final defensive move. He placed me on a performance improvement framework. The email arrived Monday morning with absolutely no warning. No prior conversations. No documentation of any deficiencies. Just a formal PIP. A performance improvement plan. The corporate kiss of death. Usually the final step right before termination. Except performance improvement plans require specific, measurable deficiencies by law. You can't just say someone is performing poorly. You need documentation. Examples. Data showing where they're failing to meet standards. Trent listed only vague issues. Communication gaps with leadership. Difficulty adapting to organizational changes. Resistance to new management structures. Nothing specific. Nothing measurable. Nothing that could be tracked or improved with concrete steps. HR flagged it within 2 hours. They sent Trent a reply requesting detailed supporting documentation for each claimed deficiency. Previous warnings I'd supposedly received. Examples of failed deliverables. Metrics showing decline in my performance. He had none of it. Because none of it actually existed. And now HR was paying very close attention to every single thing he did. Every move he made was being scrutinized. Every decision questioned. Every claim investigated. He'd painted himself into a corner with no way out. The walls were closing in. I was asked to attend a closed executive session 3 days before the board review. Not Trent. Just me. The invitation came directly from the VP of Operations. We need to clarify some historical context before the board presentation. Your presence is required. I arrived at the executive conference room on the top floor 15 minutes early. The VP was already there with coffee. So was the CFO and the Chief People Officer. They didn't waste any time with small talk or pleasantries. The VP slid a document across the polished table. Did you authorize or recommend the staffing freeze that Trent attributed to you in his August strategy memo? I read the memo carefully. It claimed I'd recommended freezing all hiring due to team management concerns. It made it sound like I couldn't handle additional people. No, I said calmly and clearly. I never recommended that. I advocated strongly for hiring 3 additional analysts to manage our growth. I pulled out my tablet and opened my email archive. I showed them my original staffing proposal from July. The one where I'd outlined detailed growth projections and budget justifications for team expansion. Then I showed them Trent's response, where he denied my request due to budget constraints and organizational priorities. The same budget constraints that mysteriously disappeared when he hired Blake 3 months later at a senior-level salary. The CFO's expression darkened as she read both documents. Board review day finally arrived. I wasn't scheduled to present initially. Blake was supposed to cover operations with Trent's oversight and guidance. I was just attending as team support, according to my calendar invitation. Trent stood at the front of the boardroom looking confident. He had his practiced smile locked firmly in place. His presentation was polished and professional. He talked about organizational evolution and leadership development and preparing for future growth. Halfway through his presentation, the CFO interrupted him. Trent, can you clarify why your restructuring overview document states that these changes originated from May Parker's underperformance? Complete silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your heart pound. Every board member looked up from their tablets simultaneously. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Trent's smile faltered for just a second. That's a simplified version for the executive summary. The reality is obviously more complex than one sentence. I have documentation suggesting otherwise, the CFO continued calmly. May's team exceeded targets by 12% last quarter. Client satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in 3 years. Where exactly is the underperformance? Trent tried to pivot smoothly. Performance isn't just about numbers and metrics. It's about scalability and leadership presence and strategic vision. The VP opened a folder in front of her. We have multiple emails where you praised her strategic vision. Multiple times over multiple quarters. Board members started flipping through their materials. They had my attachments. All of them. Every document I'd sent. He tried desperately to recover. He tried to reframe his points and redirect the conversation back to his narrative. But each statement he made was met with a document, a timestamp, an email he'd personally sent, data that directly contradicted what he was saying now. May struggled with executive communication. The VP held up a printed email chain. You wrote that her board presentations were exemplary. That's your exact word. Exemplary. She resisted organizational changes we needed to make. The CFO showed a Slack thread. She proposed most of these process improvements herself 6 months ago. Her team had significant morale issues. The chief people officer pulled up survey results on the screen. Her team has the highest engagement scores in the company. Consistently. I sat quietly at the side of the room. I didn't interrupt. I didn't add commentary. I didn't defend myself. I just watched. Trent's face went from confident to confused to pale. The board members were no longer nodding along with his presentation. They were frowning, exchanging concerned glances, taking detailed notes. His entire narrative was falling apart in real time. Everything he'd built up about me being inadequate was being systematically dismantled by his own previous statements, by his own emails, by his own words. He'd praised me extensively in writing, then tried to push me out verbally, and the written record was destroying him. After the presentation ended awkwardly, there was a private executive session. Trent wasn't invited. Blake wasn't invited. Just the board, the executive team, and me. The VP closed the door and looked at me directly. May, we need stable leadership in operations. Leadership we can trust to be honest with us about challenges and opportunities. Translation. We need someone who won't lie to cover their mistakes. Your documentation has been invaluable in clarifying what actually happened in this department. We should have been paying closer attention earlier. That's our failure. The CFO nodded seriously. We're conducting a full review of the leadership transition. In the meantime, we're immediately reversing the team reassignment. You'll resume full operational authority effective today. Just like that. My access was restored. My team returned. My role was reinstated. Not because I'd fought loudly. Not because I'd made threats or demanded justice or hired lawyers. But because I documented everything meticulously and let the facts speak for themselves. What about Trent? I asked quietly. The VP's expression went cold. Trent is being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We take integrity very seriously here. I nodded once. That was all the response I could manage without my voice shaking from relief. By Friday afternoon, Trent's access was completely revoked. The exact same way mine had been. No warning. No dramatic announcement. He just stopped appearing in meetings. His calendar went blank. His Slack status changed to away, and never changed back. Someone from his former team told me he'd been escorted out Thursday afternoon by security. They walked him to his desk and watched while he collected his personal items in a cardboard box. The same humiliation he'd orchestrated for me had happened to him. Exactly the same way. The same public shame. The company didn't make a public statement. They never do in these situations. They just quietly updated the organizational chart on the internal website. Trent's name disappeared. The VP of Operations absorbed his responsibilities temporarily. Blake lasted another month before he resigned. He wasn't fired. He just realized he was in completely over his head. He'd been set up to fail by someone who didn't care at all about his success. I actually felt genuinely sorry for him by the end. He was collateral damage in Trent's game. Arrogance always assumes no one is watching, that no one is keeping records. Those memories fade and documentation disappears. But that's not how the world actually works anymore. 3 weeks after the board review, the VP called me into her office. We want to offer you the Director of Operations position, she said directly. It's a significant step up. Higher salary, expanded authority, direct board visibility. I didn't accept immediately. I didn't smile and say yes out of gratitude. Instead, I negotiated carefully. I asked for complete team autonomy without second-guessing from above. I requested reporting transparency so my work would always be attributed correctly. I demanded written protection clauses ensuring I couldn't be sidelined without documented cause and formal process. I would never be blindsided again. Never be quietly erased. Never watch someone take credit for my work while planning my removal. The VP looked surprised by my requests. Then she smiled with what looked like respect. I appreciate that. Let me discuss these terms with the executive team. 2 days later, they agreed to everything. Every single protection I'd requested. They put it all in writing. They made it part of my official employment contract. I signed it carefully. And I stepped into the role I should have had all along. 6 months later, the operations department hit record profitability for the company. Not because I wanted revenge on Trent. Not because I worked harder just to prove him wrong. But because good leadership produces real results. Because building something real takes time and knowledge and genuine care. The team trusted me completely now. They knew I valued their work. They knew I protected them during the chaos. And they delivered exceptional results because of it. I didn't win because I played dirty or fought publicly. I won because I refused to play dirty. I didn't scream in meetings or send angry emails or sabotage Trent publicly. I documented everything. I stayed calm. I let the facts speak louder than any accusation I could have made. Trent lost his role because of his own arrogance. Because he thought he could rewrite history without anyone checking. Because he underestimated the power of a paper trail and overestimated his own cleverness. I rose because I knew my value even when someone tried to erase it. Even when my screen went black and my access got cut and my team got reassigned. I sent one email. Then I waited. And I let the truth do exactly what truth does when you give it time. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't fighting back immediately. Sometimes it's having receipts, staying calm, and letting someone destroy themselves with their own lies. That's exactly what I did. And that's exactly what happened.